Every country has a place that defines its story. For Poland, that place is Wawel. Rising high above the vista of the river, this hill has witnessed more than 1,000 years of triumphs, tragedies, and defining moments in the nation's history. It became the home of Polish kings and queens, the setting for royal coronations, and today remains one of the country's most important national symbols. But Wawel is far more than a royal residence. It's a place of legends, magnificent architecture, and remarkable collections that continue to attract millions of visitors every year. Today, we're exploring the castle, cathedral, and grounds to discover why Wawel has captured the imagination of generations, and why no visit to Krakow is truly complete without standing on this historic hill. Hi, I'm Rysiek, a Brit living in Poland, traveling across the country and sharing its history, culture, incredible places, and occasionally some of the stranger things I find along the way. If you want to follow the journey beyond YouTube, you can also find a Brit in Poland across my other social media. All the links are in the description below. And if you enjoy the videos, the biggest thing you can do here is simple. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to go a little further and directly support the channel, there are a few ways you can do that too. You'll find those in the links below. So, wherever we're exploring today, welcome to A Brit in Poland.
When most people think of Krakow, there are probably two images that immediately come to mind: the main market square and Wawel. Perched dramatically above the Vistula, this hill has been a royal residence, a coronation site, a military fortress, and one of the most important places of national memory in Poland. But before we get into any of that, we have to get up there. Photographs don't quite prepare you for the scale of the hill itself. You can see the path winding towards the top, while the castle seems to change shape depending on where you're viewing it from. From some angles elegant, from others enormous. So let's make the climb. People were living on Wawel Hill long before the Krakow we recognise today existed. By the 9th century, it was already the principal fortified settlement of the Vistulan tribe. High ground, a commanding view of the Vistula, and a naturally defensible position beside important routes through the region. From the late 10th century, the early Piast rulers used it as one of their residences, around 1038 to 1039, under Kazimierz the Restorer. Krakow effectively became the political centre of the Polish state. Kings lived here. They were crowned here. The first recorded coronation on the hill was Władysław Łokietek in 1320, and many would eventually be buried here. And once you finally climbed all the way up, Wawel initially looks surprisingly compact, and that impression doesn't last very long. The main thing to understand is that Wawel isn't really one attraction with one universal ticket. There are several routes and exhibitions inside the royal castle. Alongside the cathedral and crypts, the tower, dragon's den, gardens, and other seasonal areas. Some require separate tickets, sometimes even from different ticket offices, and numbers can be limited. Small plug that if you would like to help me purchase such tickets in the future, please check out my Buy Me a Coffee link. And thank you very much to everyone who has donated so far. It really means a lot. But yes, that confused me slightly on my first proper visit. If you want to see absolutely everything, allow most of a day. You can certainly experience the main highlights in a few hours, but you'll either have to make choices or move very quickly. Now, the Wawel we see today is the result of centuries of rebuilding. Medieval rulers had already established a major royal complex on the hill, but one of the biggest transformations came during Poland's Jagiellonian Golden Age. Under King Sigismund I the Old, between roughly 1507 and 1540s, much of the old Gothic residence was transformed into the Renaissance palace that now dominates the complex. And this is where Wawel starts to tell you something about Poland itself. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Polish crown, and later the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, stood at the centre of one of the largest political powers in Europe. Wawel had to look the part. The main castle rooms are spacious and richly decorated, and they give you far more of that royal palace feeling than you might expect from the comparatively restrained exterior. But some of my favourite areas are actually the ones that feel completely different. The Lapidarium in particular is quite special. You move into these dark, cavern-like spaces underneath the castle, surrounded by fragments of architecture and archaeological remains. It feels less like walking around a palace, and more like you've somehow wandered into the foundations of it. There's something slightly eerie about the whole place. And then there is the Armoury, which is extensive. Swords, firearms, armour, and weaponry covering centuries of warfare. I'm not going to attempt to catalogue everything here. We'd still be inside Wawel by the time episode 5 comes out, but if military history is your thing, this section alone can absorb quite a bit of time. The name Sigismund appears repeatedly around Wawel, and perhaps the most famous example sits above the cathedral. The Sigismund bell was cast in 1520 and rang for the first time the following year. It weighs almost 10 tons without its fittings and is still rung manually on major religious and national occasions. It is another example of just how ceremonial Wawel had become. This wasn't simply where the monarch happened to live, this was a stage for the Polish state. But political power doesn't stay in one place forever. From the late 16th century, the centre of royal government began shifting towards Warsaw. You sometimes hear this reduced to a simple story that a fire at Wawel forced King Sigismund III Vasa to abandon Krakow. The reality was more complicated. The move happened gradually, and Warsaw made increasingly political and geographical sense within the Commonwealth. By the early 17th century, the royal court had effectively settled there for good. Krakow therefore stopped functioning as the everyday centre of government, but something interesting happened to Wawel. It lost political power, without losing symbolic power. Kings continued to be crowned here, they continued to be buried here, and over the following centuries, that symbolic importance would arguably become even greater. At the end of the 18th century, Poland disappeared from the map, divided between Austria, Prussia, and Russia. And after the Third Partition in 1795, Krakow eventually came under Austrian control, and Wawel underwent one of the strangest transformations in its history. The royal and ceremonial complex became part of an Austrian military fortress. Buildings were converted into barracks, defensive works were added, and the hill that had once represented Polish monarchy now housed the army of a foreign empire. It took years of campaigning and negotiation before Austrian troops finally withdrew from Wawel between 1905 and 1911. Restoration followed, So even before Poland itself regained independence, there was already a very deliberate effort to reclaim this place. Then came another occupation. During the Second World War, Nazi Germany made Krakow the administrative capital of the general government. Hans Frank chose Wawel as his residence and headquarters. And again, the symbolism is difficult to miss. An occupying regime didn't simply take control of offices somewhere in Krakow. It occupied Wawel, the place that had represented Polish kings, Polish statehood, and Polish history. After the war, Wawel was restored once again. And by this point, its role had become something much larger than that of a former royal castle. To understand that, we need to go inside the cathedral. The cathedral has been the ceremonial heart of Wawel for centuries. Polish kings were crowned here, worshipped here, and were eventually buried beneath it. The interior is magnificent, although unfortunately, photography restrictions mean I can't show you very much of it, which, as someone attempting to make a video about Wawel, is mildly inconvenient. You can, however, climb the Sigismund Tower, and it is quite a climb. The route gets narrow, the stairways get cramped, and if there are plenty of other visitors, you'll occasionally find yourself trying to negotiate two-way human traffic in spaces clearly designed before anyone had invented tourism. But eventually, you reach the bell itself. And from there, the route eventually takes us back down towards one of the most historically important parts of the cathedral, the crypts. What surprised me slightly is how compact they actually feel. There are a number of different chambers, but the corridors are fairly tight, and when there are other tourists, you definitely feel as though you're wandering through some enormous underground necropolis. Yet, some extraordinary people are buried here, and if you're unfamiliar with Polish history, it's quite easy to walk past some of these sarcophagi without fully understanding the significance of the names. So I'll spare you an examination paper and concentrate on just a few. You have Stefan Batory, King of Poland and Grand Duke of Lithuania during the late 16th century. He is generally remembered as one of the Commonwealth's most effective military rulers. Then we have Jan III Sobieski, probably the most internationally recognizable Polish king buried here, particularly for his role in defeating the Ottoman army during the relief of Vienna in 1683. Elsewhere are figures including Tadeusz Kościuszko, Adam Mickiewicz, Julius Słowacki, and General Władysław Sikorski. And this is where Wawel's role begins to change. It stops simply being a royal burial place. Mickiewicz and Słowacki were poets whose remains were brought back from abroad decades after their deaths. Sikorski, Poland's wartime prime minister in exile, was returned from Britain and re-interned here in 1993. These people weren't kings, they were being placed at Wawel because by then, burial here had become one of the highest forms of national commemoration. There is also one small detail down here that I particularly like. In 1946, a young priest named Karol Wojtyła celebrated his first Mass in St. Leonard's Crypt. Decades later, the world would know him as Pope John Paul II. And then we come to Józef Piłsudski, a central figure in Poland's independence movement and in the re-establishment of the Polish state in 1918. Even today, you don't have to travel very far around Poland before encountering another Piłsudski monument. I visited his museum outside of Warsaw, and at some point he absolutely deserves an entire video of his own. For now, what matters is that his burial here demonstrates how far Wawel had moved beyond its original royal role. President Lech Kaczynski and his wife Maria were also buried here following the Smolensk air disaster in 2010. The decision was controversial at the time, another reminder that even today, burial at Wawel carries enormous symbolic weight.
Wawel has always meant a little bit more to me than simply being a beautiful castle. It was one of my dad's favourite places in Poland, and in an interview not long before his death, he was asked if there was anything he'd like to do again. His answer was simple: revisit Wawel. Standing here today, it's easy to see why.
Much of this episode talking about people returning to Wawel, sometimes even after death. There is something strangely appropriate about being back here myself, thinking about him. But there is another side of Wawel we've managed to avoid so far, and this one involves considerably fewer kings, and considerably more dragons. Beneath Wawel Hill is Smocze Jama, the Dragon's Den, and if you've spent any time in Krakow, you've probably already discovered that the city is extremely fond of its dragon. The legend first appears in the early 13th century chronicle of Wincenty Cadwulbeck, although naturally we're firmly in the territory of folklore rather than documented history. In the familiar version, a dragon terrorizes the area around Wawel until someone finally finds a way to kill it, usually by feeding it an animal stuffed with sulfur. The resulting thirst causes the dragon to drink from the Vistula until, well, let's just say, Krakow's earliest pest control strategy lacked subtlety. The cave itself is a bit of fun. There are plenty of stairs, because apparently Wawel hadn't punished my legs enough already, but once you're underground, it becomes surprisingly atmospheric. Narrow passages, exposed rock, and just in case your imagination isn't doing enough work, they occasionally pump dragon breathing noises through the cave. It's subtle. Eventually, you emerge at river level beside Krakow's famous fire-breathing dragon, created by sculptor Bronisław Kromi and installed in 1972. And the dragon hasn't stayed confined to Wawel. In recent years, Krakow has embraced Smok Wawelski as something of a city mascot through the Dragon Trail, a growing collection of small dragon statues scattered around Krakow, each with its own character or theme. You'll stumble across them in some surprisingly random places. I found quite a few while exploring the city, and will encounter more of them as this series continues. They're completely different from Krakow's grand monuments and heavy history, and I have to admit they're rather cute. But this is still the original star of the show. Every few minutes it breathes actual fire, because after 1,000 years of kings, wars, occupation and national mythology, sometimes you just need a metal dragon setting fire to the air beside a river. And that brings us back where we started, below the castle, beside the Vistula. The riverside boulevards here feel like such an obvious recreational part of modern Krakow, and that's easy to forget that they had such more of a practical origin. Large sections were developed in the early 20th century as part of efforts to control flooding along the Vistula. Today, they're one of the best places in central Krakow simply to slow down. You can walk beneath Wawel, cycle along the river, sit on an embankment, or take one of the sightseeing boats operating from here. I haven't actually taken one myself, so for once I will resist pretending to be an expert on something I haven't done. One of the smaller monuments along the stretch has one of Krakow's saddest stories. This is Juk, According to the story associated with him after his owner died suddenly, Duke continued waiting near a place where he had last seen him for months. Locals began feeding and caring for him, and he eventually became something of a symbol of loyalty in the city. It's a tiny monument compared with Wawel towering above it, but after spending so much of this episode around kings and national heroes, I rather like that Krakow also found a little space beside the river for a very loyal dog. There are several other things worth keeping an eye out for as you continue along the river. The pomnik czynu zbrojnego żołnierzy Polski walczące commemorates Polish soldiers and those who fought for the country during the Second World War. Nearby, you'll also find Krakow's Avenue of Stars, created in 2008, with plaques dedicated to Polish and international figures, including names such as Marek Grechuta and Celine Dion. There are restaurant boats, sightseeing cruises, and plenty of places to stop for something to eat or drink. But depending on when you visit, the river can become more colourful than this. This is Wianki, and after spending most of this episode surrounded by stone, tombs, armour and centuries of history, it feels like the perfect place to finish. The riverside fills with people, music and stalls, and you can make traditional floral wreaths, and eventually watch them being placed onto the Vistula. But there is one more place along this stretch that gives you a completely different view of Krakow. Just across the river, you'll also find a small amusement area, dominated by the Krakow Eye. It's not exactly an essential historical attraction, but after an episode spent climbing hills, towers, and crypt staircases, apparently the logical thing to do is climb into an enormous observation wheel as well. From the top, though, you get a superb perspective over the Vistula and Wawel, and across towards another part of Krakow with an entirely different story, because over there is Kazimierz. Wawel has been a royal residence, a fortress, a burial place, and one of the most powerful symbols of Polish history. But one of the things I like about Krakow is how quickly the character of the city changes once you move beyond it. And in the next episode, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're heading into Kazimierz, a district known around the world for its Jewish heritage, but with a history that's considerably more complicated than that label suggests. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, and see you next week. Do zobaczenia.